In this presentation, we will take a look at bank feeds screen layout within the QuickBooks Online program. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. A look at what the screen will look like and some features in terms of viewing within QuickBooks Online. Here is our example file. We're over here in the banking section. So within the banking section, we have set up the bank feeds. So we have a screen here with our bank feeds now. We have some summary data up top, and we have the bar over here, our taskbar over here. Now, when we work with the bank feeds, we might want to have as much room as possible on the screen. We also might want to zoom in and out of the screen. So some of the things we may want to do once we are set up in the bank feed is to remove this screen to the left, which is we can select this 3 bars, which is a hamburger icon, and that'll remove those items and give us a little bit more room. This information up top will give us some idea about our different banking activities, a summary view, but that's really not what we're working with most of the time. So we might want to minimize that with this little icon here. So we can minimize that. And then we can see our data most clearly here. So if we just overview what we have here, we've got the banking section. We're in the banking section tab up top as opposed to the bank rules. So rules are items we can set up to help us to categorize. So we, of course, want to be here most of the time for the banking section. So we have the checking account that we're here. This is the account that we're going to be using at this time. We have, of course, our list of accounts. Then we have our tabs up top, and these are important to note where we're at here. We're in the For Review tab. That means that this information here isn't necessarily populated within QuickBooks yet. It's been downloaded from the bank, and so we have all the banking information, but it has not yet necessarily been populated. It's for review, meaning we got to go in there and do whatever we need to do to it. What do we need to do to it? We at least need to add an account. We got to make sure that if there's a vendor or that we have the correct payee or the customer that we're applying this to, and so we have to match some of this information out. Once we do that a few times, QuickBooks will start to memorize that for some transactions. But just because we have the data in there right now doesn't mean that it's in the system yet. So we've got to basically put it into the system. Now also note that we need to be really careful when we're entering data from the bank if we're also entering things like checks into the system. So we'll talk a little bit how that is done. I mean, clearly, usually, if we're printing checks from the system, we want to enter our information into the system and then match it up to the banking system. So if we have a system set up, in other words, where we are putting all the information in from the bank, and we're not entering anything into the system before it reaches the bank, then we have less likelihood that we're going to have any kind of duplicates or any kind of problem with that. However, if we have a system set up where we're writing checks within the QuickBooks system or entering deposits as we get deposits, which is often something we want to do, then we got to make sure that those things are matching up and that we don't have duplicate information. So it just really kind of depends what system we're using. But in any system we're using, we need to be careful that the information that we're pulling in here is properly categorized and that we don't have duplicate information. So then we have the QuickBooks in QuickBooks area here. This is going to show us the information that has now been put into QuickBooks. So it's done with the Review tab, has gone to the In QuickBooks tab. And then we have this tab over here, which is Excluded, meaning that could be something that we might use, for example, if there's a duplicate or something like that in our information, and we want to take it out of the Review tab. We don't want it in the Review. We don't want to add it to QuickBooks because it's a duplicate, and therefore we will exclude it, and we're kind of afraid to delete it. We don't want to delete it. So we put it in the Excluded tab, so it'll be over here. It won't be in the QuickBooks system, but it won't be showing up in the Review tab, and it won't be in the QuickBooks tab. Then if we scroll down and we look at our actual data here, here's going to be our data. We know we have the date, we've got the description, we've got the payee, we've got the category or match, spent, received, and then the action that we're going to have. Now note that some of this is populated from, automatically from the system, and it's populated based on the banking information And some of that information is, of course, going to vary depending on what banks we use. We can use the batching options here. That means if we check off any of these items, then we have these options up top to accept, to exclude selected, or to modify the selected. We'll talk more about what to do that when we talked about actual transactions. But if we accept the selected transaction, that's going to mean that we want to include it in QuickBooks. So it's going to move it. It's going to then include it in QuickBooks, and we'll see it in the In QuickBooks tab. If we batch these up and then we exclude those batched items, that's going to not include it in QuickBooks, remove it here so that it'll go up to this tab excluded up top. Then we're going to have our filter. So if we select our filter, we've got the range of information. We can select the presetted time frames, or we can select a custom time frame. We're currently in the alls section, so it's going to have all of the transactions. Now the ones that are green, QuickBooks is basically taking a guess of what to do with it. So those items also, if we go to the Recognize tab, then again, QuickBooks is saying, we found a match, we took a guess on how we should apply this out. So we'll talk more about that as we look at specific transactions. But that's just an example of QuickBooks taking a guess, trying to help us out, and that could be useful as we go. So the first time we operate this, then QuickBooks will not have memorized as much of the transactions. This should get easier as we go, as we apply the same type of processes. QuickBooks can memorize some more of the transactions, and we can start to apply rules to help QuickBooks to populate the proper expense accounts and so on. Then we have the printing, and then we have the settings cog, and this will give us some display options. So within the display options, we have the columns here. I would add the check number, the payee. I would add pretty much all of this is really useful typically. I don't usually add the editable date field, copy bank detail memo. This is important because it'll give the more detailed description from the bank. So if QuickBooks might try to truncate what the description is, which is useful sometimes, a lot of times it guesses right, but a lot of times we want to see that full bank detail that it will give from the bank so that we can properly categorize, especially if it's the first couple months that we are working with. Remember category selection, useful, and show bank details. And again, I would show the bank details there, especially when you're first starting out, because that'll give you the bank details and not any kind of guesswork from QuickBooks. Then we want to see the number of rows. I typically use as many rows as I can find, as I can get, so that we don't have to keep on scrolling to the right. I'd like to see all the rows on one page. It just helps me to be able to I'd rather just scroll down than be limited on the rows. So I usually maximize the number of rows. You may not need that many rows, but I choose as many rows that I need on a particular page if possible. The compact will kind of compact the data a bit, so it'll be a bit more closer together. So if you feel that you'd like to see it in a more compact format, then you can select this. If you think that's a little bit too tight for your eyes, you'd want to see it less compacted, then you can unselect this item. Then we're going to have the action field over here, and this is where we're going to basically add these transactions, and that will be basically, we can add them instead of in a batch format, we can add them, and that'll basically add them to QuickBooks, and we can have the matching items, and we'll go through these items as we go through and see how we can modify the data as needed and add them to the system as needed. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.